You're very welcome to the next episode in our Work From Anywhere series. Today we're going to be speaking about remote work and global mobility with Simon Rogers, Luci Davis and Vincent Hennequin. Simon Rogers is going to be the co-moderator today. He is the managing partner of Talent Mobility Search. Don't forget, in the last week we have launched our Work From Anywhere white paper to try and understand how global mobility leaders tackle work from anywhere from a strategic and operational perspective. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to be talking about my Work From Anywhere dream. We'll be talking with Roberta Sawatsky, Daphne LaForest and Karsten Ryman. For now, enjoy episode 15. Hi everyone, you are very welcome to our Work From Anywhere series today. We're doing it in conjunction with Talent Mobility Search. Very grateful to Simon for getting involved in this one. Very excited. Today, what are we going to be talking about? It's going to be about remote work and global mobility. I remember being at the Global Mobility Executive Conference in London at the end of September. Work from anywhere basically wasn't even on the agenda, ended up taking up over 80% of the discussion. Lots of different pain points here, lots of elements to discuss, lots of angles that maybe haven't been discussed already. I was very excited when catching up with the likes of Luci and Vincent and Simon in the last week or so, trying to figure out what angles are not necessarily being addressed or discussed too much. You've got the angles of diversity, inclusion, the angles of climate change. But I think first and foremost is really trying to go through, as a global mobility leader, where is this going? What's the impact? And what are the lessons that we can learn? So without further ado, I would like to bring on our guests who are going to be discussing this further. We've got Luci and Vincent and Simon. Thank you all of you for being part of today's episode. And Simon, as I said, grateful to be having you on this. Maybe would you like to give a little bit of a short intro as well to yourself and how you see all this as well before going to Luci and Vincent?
Sure, thanks, John. So I've been working in mobility for around 25 years now. And I led mobility at two banks, an insurance company and also a med tech. And I'm now a managing partner at Talent Mobility Search, which is a executive search firm within the mobility sector. I think this is a really interesting subject and one which, mobility and HR are really going to have to get to grips with and really come up with some innovative solutions as we go along this route. So really fascinated to see some great stuff coming out today.
Great. Well, as I said, thanks again for having you on. Luci, I'd like to get your angle on this. I mean, you're in the talent mobility side of it, so that mixture between talent mobility, global mobility, so many different angles. And I think what's interesting about your role is that on the one hand, you have an appreciation for the risks and what can go wrong, the administration side of it, for example. But on the other hand, you're equally plugged into, what can this do for employer branding, how to manage it, and so that kind of balancing of both sides of the equation. So maybe would you give us a little bit of an intro to yourself and also how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. So I'm Luci. I'm head of global mobility and reward at Symphony. So for those who don't know, Symphony is a fintech organization, secure communications and workflow platform, mainly serving the financial services industry. I've been in the mobility space for 15 years, so I've got a fair bit of experience, but I'm also a coach. I've got some great insight firsthand from employees around this whole working remotely conundrum. In terms of my take on it, I think, John, you hit the nail on the head. It's that balance between compliance and value proposition and competition for talent. Ultimately, you want to be flexible, but from where I'm sitting, I don't think a lot of the compliance challenges that always existed pre-COVID have gone away. So I, for one, am really fascinated by how a lot of companies are managing some of the more generous work from anywhere policies. In the space that we work in, for example, working remotely, the people that we need to hire, we're competing against the likes of Google and Microsoft. So employee value proposition, employer brand, part of our total reward strategy, having that flexibility is absolutely critical.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. At the end of the day, if you're competing with the likes of a HubSpot, which is a 90-day work from anywhere policy, or a Revolut, which is a 60-day work from anywhere policy. Now, we know the detail behind those isn't true work from anywhere. Obviously, it's specific countries. But I think nonetheless, if a competitor is plastering work from anywhere across their jobs boards, for example, it certainly does create a different dynamic, doesn't it? Vincent, I'd like to get your angle on it. You're in the new job, obviously, in the last while. But can you give us a bit more info to yourself and also how you see all this?
Okay, yeah. Well, my name is Vincent Hennequin. Indeed, I just joined a great company, Elements Global Services. I am their business development director, EMEA. Originally from the northern part of France, but I've been a border worker, so meaning I'm in France and working in Switzerland, so crossing the border every day, which makes my life a bit special in that sense. I have 20 years of experience in business development and marketing, and the past 6 years I've been in global mobility industry, which I totally felt in love with, as you can see on my face probably. And then I can tell you maybe a little bit about Elements. Yes, we are a global tech firm focusing on software that is built to go beyond country borders and simplify actually companies' ability to expand their business, onboard employees, manage compliance, and pay globally. So we are right in the middle of the work from anywhere nowadays. We provide employment solutions in over 160 countries through our own legal entities. And that's what we call actually ourselves a direct model, because we let our client expand their business, onboard talents, manage compliance, and pay employees in new countries without the need to register their own entity. So that opens a lot of new possibilities actually. And let's say my job really is to help my customers to save time, money, and headaches, especially by handling international legal, payroll, benefits, compliance, and HR, so that they can actually really focus on the talent acquisition and the day-to-day business activities, basically.
I have to say that is one of the exciting things about these new solutions that are emerging. Some of them have been around for a while, but you're really seeing an explosion in that particular space. And again, all coming down to this kind of shift in values we're seeing in the world at the moment, where this remote work as a start is not just a blip. It's here to stay. We all agree on that. But then again, what does that mean for the ability to hire internationally or to work temporarily abroad? I'd like to see your angle, Simon. I mean, on that talent mobility side, are you seeing more requests from all levels to work from anywhere? I mean, how do you see it from that angle?
Absolutely. And actually, there's two parts of it, John. Firstly, in terms of talent acquisition, absolutely, there are many, many candidates who are now saying, if we don't have this option, and maybe that's, we want to work permanently remotely, or we want to work a few weeks, a few months of the year remotely, we're not interested in the role. And secondly, it's also important in terms of, retention. I'm hearing from a number of candidates who are saying, actually, I'm not happy. I don't want to go back to 5 days a week, getting on, I've enjoyed life. I've actually worked from a different location, somewhere outside my own country, and I want to carry on doing that. So absolutely, we are seeing that real, I guess, push, and people do see this as much as a benefit as any of the others that we have out there.
So again, just reinforcing that on the one hand, you've got the flexibility of remote work, but then you've also got this flexibility of work from anywhere requests coming in, be they permanent or temporary.
Yes.
But speaking about that, I mean, looking at your own policy, Luci, your own company, can you tell us more? Do you have a work from anywhere policy? And as you see it, I mean, what are the fundamentals of a strong work from anywhere policy? And by the way, I know very few companies have this figured out. By the way, it's a moving target, but I'm still like to ask you that question, how you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for context, we're a mid-stage startup, so we're very much in growth stage. A big chunk of our business is engineering, and many of our engineering folks, they typically work in scrums and squads, and there's a need for in-person collaboration. We do, as part of our value proposition and kind of total reward offering that we communicate upon hiring, we do have a 2-week work from anywhere allowance, if you like, but it's 2 weeks. We're pretty stringent on it. We operate in, obviously, the financial services space. It's a highly regulated environment. It's important for us that we're compliant, that we're not seen to be falling foul of any of those regulations and restrictions. We do get a few requests from employees who want to go back to their home countries, which is natural, extended holidays, and we look at those on a case-by-case basis. And we look at things like exposure, nature of role from a corporation tax perspective, and then also immigration permission to work. And we'll look at those on a case-by-case. But our formalized offering is that we are 2 weeks. You're allowed 2 weeks, and that's pretty much it.
Fascinating. And then within that, then I mean, I can understand why you'd only say 2 weeks, because of course, being heavily regulated, etc., it's just more of a risk going beyond that, let's say. But then, what do you find the biggest challenge is that you're facing within that, let's say, and are you finding a lot of employees are requesting it? Because that's another thing we're hearing. It's one thing being able to offer it, but there's certainly a lot of requests coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think the honest answer to that is we probably haven't seen the extent of which that's going to be taken up. This is something relatively new that we've put in place in parallel with our hybrid working proposals and arrangements. Obviously, much of the world is still under quite a lot of restrictions in terms of COVID and quarantine requirements and whatnot. So whilst we've seen a few requests, it's typically been people taking an extended vacation.
I get you.
I think next year we'll really see whether this is exercised and really used as an employee benefit.
That's exactly what we're seeing as well. I mean, essentially the message is that, especially with COVID restrictions still in place, it's just not something that's too realistic at the moment, because with the instability, cases can rise, then all of a sudden you're closed off. So it's not something that's coming in just yet. But I'd be curious then, Vincent, on your side, how do you guys handle this internally in Element? Are you all able to work from anywhere? What countries? What's the policy, I guess? Just curious.
So yeah, we at Element have an internal policy to establish the most important points around what I would say a more hybrid mode work. So this is really a dynamic policy, because since we had the pandemic, well, things got more flexible even, and we are evaluating how employees work better in this environment every day. And we also have like hybrid workers, but also workers hired in locations where we don't actually have any offices, which is actually my case today. I'm using a co-working space to go to work in Switzerland 4 days a week. So I could say that we are also like with fully remote individuals here, and about working remotely abroad, we can assess case by case, and we tend to be flexible and really cautious, of course, because it's our job, with all the tax, legal, social security risks that may involve working longer abroad. Yes.
And so then looking at taking a big step back, so you can see a case-by-case analysis is something that we see quite frequent, because it can be one person, one role can trigger, for example, something as simple as permanent establishment. How do you then see it then, Simon, from the market? Are you seeing a lot more requests from work from anywhere from the top line executives? And is it particular industries are getting a lot more of them? Like, for example, Luci talked about how financial services, they're heavily regulated. They can't do it as much. Are you seeing particular industries where there's a real push towards that in the market? Like, for example, tech or whatnot? Or what are the trends you're seeing there?
To some degree, I think certainly in the tech and startup space, there is a lot more than in the perhaps traditional, industries that are out there. But to be honest with you, it's not as clear cut as you might imagine. And we are seeing in the more traditional industries, companies being a lot more open towards this and trying to make it work. That's what I think is a good thing. Of course, as you said, there's a lot of compliance issues and other things to consider, and they have to think about those. But certainly in terms of hiring, it's fairly much across the board. People are willing to be more flexible than they ever were before.
Good. Okay. And then if you look at it then, Luci, I'm trying to think about the number one risk, and same for you, Vincent, for your clients. What are you finding is the number one risk, in your case, Luci, keeping you up at night, and likewise, Vincent, for you, keeping your clients up at night? Is it permanent establishment? Is it the data security side? Is it income tax? Is it the visa side of it? What is the biggest risk, I guess, that you're finding with this?
From my perspective, I'm going to take Oh, sorry, Vincent. Did you want to go?
No, please go.
Okay. From my perspective, I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle, actually. For me, it's about culture, in terms of what culture do we really want to create. And the reason I say that is, as a fintech business, we have this technology startup, flamboyant, happy-go-lucky mentality in parts of the business, but we are working with financial services organizations. So we have representation from two industries that are traditionally very, very different. You have engineers, you have that startup vibe, you have people working in the big banks, and it's like, how do you bring all of that together and create something that works for everybody? And then what is the messaging around that? And that for me is actually the biggest challenge, particularly in the context of talent, because it's got to be one message, but it's a message for multiple very, very different audiences internally.
And that challenge of marketing is a huge challenge for so many global mobility leaders that we're speaking to, that in many ways, if you think of it pre-pandemic, global mobility leaders were primarily dealing with expats who were a small percentage of the workforce. Whereas now with work from anywhere, when that does kick into gear, and we're already seeing a lot more people request it, which means there's a lot more numbers of people to deal with. And all of a sudden it can't be something that you're able to deal for just one team. You have to be able to get the message out there. Here are the risks. Here's what we need to watch out for. Educating people around, okay, this is why we can't offer work from anywhere in every single country, for example. And so in many ways, it's one thing having a policy on paper. It's another thing actually being able to get it out there and market it in many ways. So in your case, it's marketing it also from the talent perspective to be able to get the right talent, because you are competing with all that tech talent in many ways. And what about your case then, Vincent? What are you finding is the number one risk keeping the clients up at night?
Well, from our side, I think the number one risk really is that people are employing in country A to work in country B without consideration of tax, between quotes, permanent establishment and employment laws risk, paying the right statutory contributions in the right country, immigration concerns, particularly in Europe, A1 and posted worker notifications. So compliance, definitely. What we see is that the global labor laws are constantly evolving, forcing companies to reevaluate their obligations as employers while changing the established HR processes. So keeping up actually with all of these changes in every country where you operate can be actually quite difficult, even for the most experienced HR, compliance, tax, and legal teams. So this makes achieving new business goals, such as expansion into new markets, employing remote teams, onboarding employees in new countries, and ensuring global compliance, a really challenging objective. And that's why, in my point of view, it is really important to have experts that understand that every expanding business has actually unique needs, and that there is not like one size fits all type of solution or one tool, because we're going to talk about tools that can solve every situation. Someone, I would say internally or externally, really has to be the guardian, the guide that support your business through any global employment challenges, providing your company with, I would say, peace of mind, while guaranteeing that you can support your global ambitions and yes, global ambitions.
Yeah, like you say, absolutely critical to have the right experts and tools in place to try and mitigate against that. Yeah. One of the things when we caught up last week, trying to think of ideas on to tackle this particular episode, I love the idea from Luci when we said what is not being discussed. Luci, you mentioned climate change. I'd like to get Simon and Luci, both your input on that. The impact of work from anywhere on climate change, will it be positive or negative? How do you see?
So from my perspective, I think there's work from anywhere, but then there's also an element of connectivity in terms of where are you tied to from a headquarter company, country, legal entity perspective. And great if you have a role that you can maintain that connectivity through online, video conferencing or whatever. For me, the question is around, does that mean there needs to be extensive business travel to make those connections, to maintain those relationships, to see those customers? Because if that's the case, and that's where I see personally the detrimental impact from a climate change perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've seen it also in remote work, how on the one hand, you're saving the commute, for example, that's definitely saving a certain amount of pollution energy. On the other hand, you're using more electricity at home in a less efficient way. I mean, it seems to be overall a net positive, but still just to considering both factors. Simon, how do you see that? I have to say, it was a nice question that Luci came up with that last time we talked. How do you see that one? Because it's not one that's really being discussed too often.
No, I think what an important thing is that, to going back to your point, John, companies are getting more and more, they no longer treat the ESG report as a tick box exercise. It's now absolutely essential. And, to your point earlier, global mobility, whilst it's probably the most carbon heavy HR department, it only represents a very small part of the population. We work from anywhere, it now represents a much bigger part of the population. I agree with all Luci's points on the environmental side, but also on the social side. I question, does it in any way, and I don't have any data or anything to back this up, but does it hinder social mobility? And could that be a negative of work from anywhere? On one hand, to your point, absolutely it can help social mobility. Jobs go out to a far broader range of people. But people in country, those people perhaps who don't have the setup they need, does it, so you want to hire, you're in the UK, you want to hire someone in mainland Europe, you don't have an office there. How do we ensure we don't hinder social mobility for those people who don't necessarily have the setup to be able to work from anywhere?
Well, let's tease it out, all of us here. I mean, if we bring that to the next level, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. Ultimately, does work from anywhere, like you say, does it help or hinder social mobility? And if you think of it, again, take a step back. On the one hand, like you say, you create these opportunities because you can hire from anywhere in the world. And so people in, let's say, rural communities, provided they've got their internet, they can access this great opportunity of jobs. On the other hand, if you talk about work from anywhere temporarily abroad, you've got people, let's say, in, for example, Switzerland, Vincent, who want to go work on a beach in Thailand. Fantastic. But maybe there might be people in emerging markets who can't necessarily work in Switzerland because it's too expensive. You know, and again, coming back to it again, you've got, let's say, expats, Indian expats in the US who can now go back home and take care of their sick family, for example, that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do because they can work from anywhere back at home. So it's all kind of multi-layered. How would they, let's say, Luci and Vincent, how would you see that point that Simon made, a very, very good one, about this whole diversity and inclusion aspect of it?
So from my perspective, I mean, I've done a fair bit of work in the past in the education and non-profit sector, and where what really helps, I think, particularly from people from disadvantaged backgrounds, is being able to actually immerse them in an environment where they can learn and to experience an environment they may not necessarily have experienced previously. So for me, I think this work remotely is great, but I think there's also an element of responsibility in terms of bringing people together and almost making sure there's equal opportunities in the context of a workplace environment. And for me, in those particular sectors, I think that's where this work from anywhere doesn't work. I think sometimes you actually need to really take people out of the situation and give them that experience that they may not otherwise have had. So quite a specific example, but that's my take on it.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on that as well, Vincent. But another angle to add to it is the potential discrimination issue. That on the one hand, you might want to offer it to every employee. But for example, if an employee can't get a visa in a country, that's outside the company's control. So that's not necessarily a discriminatory issue. But for example, if a company specifically targets only certain levels of people to do work from anywhere, well, that may be. So, you know, there can be some legal elements to this to be considered as well. But how do you see that, Vincent? I mean, how do you see the diversity and inclusion angle on it?
Well, there are certainly a lot of advantage of working from anywhere, and we know them. It can be better work-life balance, less sickness, absence, staff are happier, less needs maybe for holidays. You can work from home and feel like taking a break from the office, but there are as well disadvantages that we clearly see, and eventually maybe the solution to that can be a kind of hybrid type of, let's say, model of the working from anywhere, because again, it doesn't suit everyone. Staff can be feeling isolated. There can be difficulty of monitoring performance as well. They can be, I have 4 kids at home, so I can mention that there can be home distractions as well. Potential, I've been hearing that as well from other companies. Potential burnouts as well. People feeling like really lonely, being away from the office atmosphere, and definitely there are costs of working from anywhere. You cannot just like hire somebody somewhere and think that this person is just going to get his computer and start working the next day. I mean, you have to think about training, about providing, first of all, the good equipment, because it might not be exactly, as you said, Switzerland is really finely equipped, but in some other places, if you go right in the middle of France, maybe there might be places where you don't find the right connection to the internet. So yeah, you need to think about this. I know we are all using IT, and we it's part of our life. We use mobile phones, we use computers, and it's all okay with that. But yeah, it's not that easy as it is really. I mean, we've been seeing this because of the pandemic mostly. It went really really fast, but now we are back, let's say, to some kind of a new normality. And we need to think on long term, because this is here and this is going to stay. So I clearly see that, you need to work on the solutions and explore and be ready, because things are changing so fast and you don't know how it's going to be like in the nearby future. There can be other things happening to us that we haven't heard of, we haven't been thinking of. And I think it's really crucial that we start thinking about solutions that will be eventually necessary, and we are ready to apply them.
Yeah, it's a good question here from Beth. I totally agree that the D&I element of key consideration and a possible challenge. Are all employees able to afford to work from anywhere? Is there a home work setup suitable? Look at the ergonomic risks, stuff like that, and safety. And what support should an employer provide? So that's one, for example. I don't know, Luci, if you can jump in on that one on the support side. For example, ergonomic checks and things like that, for example. I presume that's something you have to bring into it possibly.
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting. So at the start of the pandemic, we actually provided a lot of support around work from home. So we were very generous from a cash perspective. We gave allowances for employees to use on whatever they needed, is the honest answer. We didn't have too strict parameters, but that was really, really valued and really, really powerful. We also actually, we typically, being that startup kind of element of our business, we actually normally provide lunch. We converted that into a monetary allowance that helped people have a little bit of extra income when working from home, which was great. But in terms of that real kind of duty of care, that those support elements really were brought in during the pandemic. It almost feels like it's accepted now that if you're going to apply for a role to work remotely, you have that home office set up, you have structured your workstation in a way that works for you. So what's interesting is initially the support was there, but now there's an expectation that people just ultimately sort themselves out. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I think it raises a question around where does the accountability sit when people are applying to work remotely? Yeah,
that's true, especially if it's working remotely abroad as well, isn't it? One of the images you mentioned as well, Vincent, of how crazy it has been during this period. I'm thinking for me, like last week, I'm going to Thailand for December and January for a couple of weeks. And I'm onto the phone to the Thai embassy. And I've then got simultaneously a Zoom with one of my tax partners. And then I've basically got my eldest Rosa, who's 5, on top of my back while I'm holding my 6-month-old Barra. And I mean, this crazy kind of amalgamation of work and family life at the same time, it has brought its challenges. But I think one of the challenges, Vincent, that you mentioned, which I'd like to ask you about, Simon, you mentioned, Vincent, about that kind of mental health and isolation side of it as well. And absolutely, there are some great advantages to remote work, some fantastic advantages, and I'm certainly one who'd be an advocate for it. But at the same time, managing the risks. The mental health side of that, Simon, how do you see that being tackled, or where does that fit in? Because isolation is definitely a challenge, yeah?
Yeah, and I think companies need to be aware of this and definitely need to find solutions to help people. I think just bringing that and playing it back into a former point as well, a lot of the talk we're doing about is about the actual people that are working from anywhere, whereas I think to help with the mental health, training also needs to happen with the people that are back in the office, because now you know what it's like. I'm sure everyone's out of sight, out of mind, and at the moment we're all in this position, we're all on screens. But in the not too distant future, there will be people who will go back into the office, the local office where they live, where they've always worked. And my theory is that isolation for those people who don't is going to get worse, because suddenly they're not part of the team. You know, how do you make sure they're not forgotten? How do you make sure their colleagues that are back in the office continue to be in touch with them? So I think people departments need to work on this. They need to think about, if someone is struggling, what do we do? Do we have a therapist, a coach, whatever the point would be? Would it be good to get some general coaching sessions just not everyone recognizes, and just to be open, my wife's a coach, like similar to Luci, but not everyone recognizes the difference between anxiety and true mental health problems. So I think companies need to invest in, firstly, identification of this, of what the issues are, and if people think they have a problem, they've got somewhere to go to, somewhere safe where they can raise these things. And as I say, training for the people who are together, are in the office, to make sure these people who are not do feel included and do feel part of the team.
Yeah, feel free, Luci or Vincent, if you guys want to add anything on that, but it is an important point. Yeah,
I think you've raised some brilliant points, Simon. I really, really do. And I think we've got to think about what well-being really means, and is it material or is it meaningful? I think there's a big question there. And I think for me, it's about how can you support employees to develop habits which are going to ultimately make their lifestyles better. So just to give a couple of examples briefly, a lot of the people I work with, the challenges are all the same. It's around setting boundaries. It's about work-life balance. It's, reevaluating purpose and career direction. And these are really common themes. So I think we're actually looking at the moment at kind of implementing like an ad hoc accessible coaching service that employees can just tap into themselves if they just need some independent assistance around managing their manager, managing their boundaries, managing their time, protecting their well-being more broadly.
Next one that came up was HubSpot. HubSpot have a 90-day work from anywhere policy. Do we think more companies are going to offer something like that? Yes or no? What do you think?
I think potentially they will do to start with. I think what we all have to accept is this is a dynamic space. It's going to continually change. So I can absolutely see other companies doing that in 2022, but they will then see, does it work? What's the negatives, etc. I think just because you get it in 2022 may not mean you get it in 2023. Everyone has to accept this is untrodden ground. We all need to work out where we're going with this.
And to be fair to HubSpot, they do say it's a temporary work from anywhere policy. So again, subject to change. Luci and Vincent, let's get your take. Global mobility and business travel will merge into one function, yes or no?
Absolutely. I think this is a great opportunity there's been years of talk, right, about mobility having a seat at the table and being heard and valued in organizations. This, along with, employer of record, third-party working arrangements, this is the perfect storm for mobility professionals to really have their moment, if you like. So I personally think yes. You think yes. And Vincent, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say no.
Go on, tell me why. That's what the discussion's all about.
So, I would say no, because from our side, well, at least at Elements, what we've seen is that global mobility already had some kind of an important advisory compliance role even before the pandemic. And what we saw then is that technology is now playing the important role on that topic, and that only technology will actually help carry this extra admin work that we see coming. And I believe at the end that business travel as we knew it will slowly come back indeed. I was a heavy traveler back like 2 years ago. I'm not traveling that much anymore because many of the things that I've done in the past, I'm doing now via Zoom, via Teams, and it's really fine doing it this way. I think my productivity has increased dramatically thanks to the implementation of those tools, or thanks to the use of it, because they were existing already. We were not using them as much. So I think, and there is another aspect. Right now, traveling is kind of still looked as being dangerous for many people. So that probably impact as well the willingness to travel again. But I see that there is, definitely a connection, but for us at least, I think it was already there.
The technology angle, no question about it. I mean, that's becoming more and more important because of the number of requests. There's some great solutions out there helping to take some of that heavy workload away. I mean, from my own angle, because my previous business was in the business travel industry, what I'm sensing is that typical corporate travel managers, they typically report into finance or procurement. The ones that report to HR really get that employer branding side of it, the balancing the risks with the opportunities. But you do have fantastic leaders in business travel, people like Karen Hutchings of EY, who've been miles ahead of the curve for many, many years. But global mobility is at a distinct advantage because global mobility sits within HR. So understanding these balances, this kind of balancing equation in many ways, I think global mobility are probably at more of an advantage than business travel if it was to merge into a function. And I guess it depends. Some companies will have a very strong strategic business travel function. They'll be at an advantage, whereas others will have a very strong global mobility function. But I think what's absolutely clear is you need to have one strategic function that's cross-functional, that understands the balancing the risks with the opportunity side of it. What do you think, Simon? I'm curious to get your take on that. Do you think business travel and global mobility will merge into one function?
I can see it being problematic, if I'm honest with you. There's certainly a case for it. I just think the skill set about the skill sets are quite different. One's about, yes, making sure your employees are safe, etc. But it's also about negotiating with the airlines, negotiating with your travel partners, etc. Mobility, I think, is more, going on a 2-week business trip to New York. Absolutely, you have to look after that person, make sure they have adequate insurance and they know where to. But sending someone for 3 years to New York is a completely, with their families as well, is a much more. You need to have much more awareness of what those people are doing and where the touch points are. We can all go on a 2 weeks holiday, a 2-week trip, absolutely hate it, and it's not a problem because we're coming back in 2 weeks' time. A 3-year assignment, that doesn't work. So I think it would be a struggle personally.
Yeah, no, fair point. On the technology point that Vincent mentioned, Luci, do you guys use technology to kind of do some pre-trip assessments? But then within the overall policy framework, how do you balance that kind of risks with the employee benefits of work from anywhere as well? I know it's kind of 2 questions in one, but interested in how you see that.
So first question is a very simple one. We're 7 years old, mid-stage startup. I mean, having technology for something like this would be a complete luxury. So absolutely not at the moment. It's really done through conversation, culmination of myself, HR, business partners and legal, and some external counsel when need be. So very, very ad hoc and very, very informal is the very honest answer. In terms of risk, it really depends. We typically are more lenient where we have a legal entity. That's pretty much the rule of thumb. Where we don't have a legal entity, we're generally not willing to consider anything because the risk for us as a business anyway, in light of the kind of industry and environment in which we operate, it's just not worthwhile. So more leniency where we have legal entities, but that aside, really we don't really look at taking or have much appetite for risk.
Interesting. So one of the things, I'm actually going to be speaking at the RePeople conference in Gran Canaria in about 10 days time. And one of the aspects that I've been speaking to the authorities there in Gran Canaria is they have this ZEC regime where it's a 4% corporation tax regime. So one of the biggest risks is permanent establishment. So be interested to try to discuss with them, is it possible to actually even set up a legal entity just there in that country to help, not have any worries from that particular aspect. So you could even have one destination set up for your remote workers who want to work remotely internationally for a period of time, obviously depending on the visas and whatnot. But that's the answer you gave is something we see quite frequently, that people are only willing to consider it if they have a legal entity in place, let's say. One of the other ones that came up is on the stakeholder group, like what stakeholder group is driving work from anywhere. I'd like to ask us, really, what are you seeing? Is this something coming from the C-suite? Is it global mobility? Is it HR? Is it finance? Who's driving the decision making? Or is it even just employees just pushing for this and saying we want to have it? Maybe Simon or Vincent, do you guys want to jump in on that?
Yeah, well, elements at least the work from anywhere. The work from anywhere, is actually driven by the exec team and the people and culture team together, and it has to be so, since work from anywhere is actually, as we said earlier, is not applicable to all populations. Some people can access to it, some will not. So definitely has to come from the top and be well decided. I'm just thinking like somebody working at Amazon in one of their fabulous gigantic warehouse can simply not be considered as a candidate for the work from anywhere. That's one decision then that has to be taken by the management, top management. Yeah.
And we'll come up to some of the last questions. Work from anywhere, do we think it'll be the standard in your industry in the years to come? Luci, do you want to take that one, and then Simon afterwards?
I think I don't think it'll be the standard across the board, but I think there'll be elements of it which are critical from a value proposition perspective. And one other thing I just want to add, and what's really interesting is the why, I think. Yes, there's a lot of talk of work-life balance, bigger houses, more countryside, less of a commute. But in addition, there are a lot of people, particularly in that technology sector, who have started side hustles during the pandemic. And I think there's a lot of work from anywhere to allow people to really manage their time and work on their side projects. So I think it will play a part. I think companies need to focus on the why and really focus on the why. And then I see an even bigger conversation longer term around contracts in terms of what companies are willing to allow people to do. Because from a talent perspective, I think if people can work on their own projects in addition to their job, as long as there's no conflict of interest, for me, that's a really attractive value proposition. So I think it's not just work from anywhere. I think it's work from anywhere and why.
Great angle. I haven't seen that brought up at all, but again, it raises so many questions and kind of looking at new angles to try and get the best talent. I mean, certainly for, anyone who's got any. Think of that. Certainly an angle we haven't heard so far. I mean, do you think work manner will become the standard? And what do you think of Luci's angle about that whole side hustle for contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we heard the expression portfolio career, where you have a number of, you have a main job, if you like, or a number of different jobs. And the pandemic and working from anywhere, working from home, have given people the opportunity for that. I do think, as I said earlier in the show, this isn't a one-time decision. We are going to have to see what happens over the next 12 to 18 months once the pandemic truly is over, and we're not quite there yet. But once it is, I think the impact on culture, the impact on social mobility, as we say, the impact on hiring, attrition, etc. And I think that we'll see. But absolutely, it's going to be. I think without a doubt, it's going to be a much bigger part of our day-to-day life than it ever was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I think
the second last question, and this is one of my favorites.
Yeah,
all of you can work from anywhere in the world. Where is it going to be and why? Luci, you start us off.
Oh, for me, it's got to be New Zealand. An abundance of vineyards, mountains, green space, beaches. I mean, no brainer for me. South Island of New Zealand.
So whereabouts in the South Island? Because there's so many parts of that. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Goodness me.
Would you be more like Milford Sound, or would you be more like Christchurch, or whereabouts? Huh?
Oh, so I actually really like Central Otago, where the wine route runs all the way through the middle. So I mean, the wine is a winner for me.
The wine is a winner. I love it. Absolutely love it. And Vincent?
Well, actually, for me, it would be anywhere. I think I always loved the idea of being a nomad, and I would never like to choose just one place. There is too much to discover, and I'd rather treat work from anywhere as an opportunity to see the world and experience remote work in different conditions. I think like today, what I'm experiencing already, the fact that I can go to a co-working space and I don't have to pick one, I can just go to any of those. We have a global contract with a company called Regus. I can just go and work from any of those offices where I'm allowed to, obviously. But yeah, that opens a lot of new opportunities, I would say. So I could be like staying a couple of nights at my friends and then go to the office nearby. I could stay with my parents, my relatives, or even live in a camper van. Why not? And still find an office in the city the next day.
I love it. Love it. And Simon, you can pick anywhere in the world. Where's it going to be?
I guess I'm going to follow Vincent to some degree, but for me, it would be any major city. I love city life. That if I could work sort of 3 months Paris, 3 months London, 3 months New York, 3 months San Francisco, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely love it. Last question then for all of you. We are at that kind of inflection point that is really, really clear when it comes to work from anywhere and global mobility and talent mobility. If there was one thing we should be talking more about, or things that we're missing, anything else you'd like to add to this to kind of close us out, Luci?
I think, if we're thinking about it from a talent mobility perspective, I do think this whole work from anywhere, remote working topic also raises the bar in terms of what we need from our managers and our leaders. I really think it sets the profile, and I think the profile of a manager has changed. I think managing across cultures, managing remotely, maintaining connectivity, those are all really key skills. So I would expect to see there being a bit of a surge in kind of manager and soft skill development to actually be able to ensure the business can continue to function with these kind of arrangements in place.
I love that answer. My previous business was an intercultural startup, Culture Me. I'm on the board of Sia Tarry with the Society of Intercultural Trainers and Researchers. And what you see is that in many ways we're a mixture of our organizational culture in work and our personality and our national culture. There's other dimensions as well. But I think with remote work, the fact you could be just as easily working with somebody the other side of the world, it does place a higher value on the softer skills like cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence, I guess. So that's an interesting angle on that. Vincent, what do you think we should be speaking more about?
Well, I think there are a couple of points here. First one is like COVID was about emergency remote working. So we had to do it. We had no choice. And now we are more talking about a permanent strategy to bring talent and globally expand. So the conversation for me has evolved here. We are in the continuity. Another point is about what we mentioned earlier. I think it's really important that sometime we really consider what are the effects of working from anywhere. I'm thinking isolation, individualism, lack of engagement to a corporation, because now, I mean, you can be hired somewhere, not even meeting the people who are actually did recruit you. You might not even go to an office to sign your contract. So you may like work for years from anywhere without actually meeting any of the people physically that you're working with. That's really one point to consider at some point. I mean, what are going to be the effects there in some years? And if you work from anywhere, you can also hire from anywhere. So that's what I just said. Well, that could be like having cost positive impacts for employers, but it could be as well disastrous for certain employees. Meaning my role in the UK can become redundant because they found another guy in a country where it's going to cost half less. So there is a big risk there. So what's going to happen next? I mean, we know those stories from the past already, but now more than ever, they are real.
They really are. They absolutely are real. Yeah. Thanks, Vincent. Maybe Simon, can you wrap this all up for us? I mean, there's so many different interweaving topics in this. It is hard to distill this down. But what's your biggest takeaways from today's discussion?
I think, there's been some really interesting points that have been raised that I wasn't aware of before. And, all three of you have made those. To me, this is something which is going to continue to develop. I think the more we converse about it, the more we share experiences, the better it's going to be. Absolutely, it's not going away. I think anyone who thinks this is going to be gone in a year is probably not right. But we've got to keep working at it. We've got to keep talking about it. And we're talking a lot today about the employee experience. We haven't touched the customer or the client experience as a result of this. How do there's other questions we can raise, such as, it's funny, we work in global mobility, don't we? And one thing we completely sell people on is that it's great to go and work in another country because of the culture of working in another office. That's how you learn to be a global person. How do we enable that in a work from anywhere environment where people don't move around so much? So there's still a lot of work to do, but I think the more of these conversations we have, the clearer it's going to become. This is great for global mobility because it's probably the first time in more years than I can remember where this is something brand new we need to come up with. There isn't a best practice or a right practice. That's still to be designed.
Thanks, Simon. You hit the nail on the head. I think such an important point. And actually on that, I'm just going to share a link down below with the white paper that we launched. The project of launch will be ongoing for the next 2 months. We're putting together this white paper to try and talk to all the different companies and global mobility leaders in tax and legal and remote work. If there is anyone that has interesting experience to share, you can see it in the link down below. And really for the rest, I have to say, you've left so much food for thought. What I love about today's discussion is you've brought different angles on it that haven't been brought up before. Luci, you talk about the side hustles, for example, to get the best talent. We spoke about the diversity and inclusion angle from a different perspective, the intercultural side of it. We spoke about climate change. We spoke about how this is changing the world of global mobility. And as you said, Simon, this once in a generation opportunity. It doesn't come along too often for global mobility leaders to really step up to the mark. So I guess with that in mind, just want to say on behalf of Simon and myself, thank you so much, Luci and Vincent, for coming on board today. Thank you, Simon, for doing this together with the Talent Mobility Executive. Really, really enjoyed today's discussion. And thank you very much. We're looking forward to continuing the discussion and learning from each other.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot, John. Thanks a lot very much.
you.
Thank
See
you.
you guys.